My mother doesn't want you here. My husband said it so quietly that no one around us noticed. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and delivered the sentence that would end our 22-year marriage. You're an embarrassment. For a moment I honestly wondered if I'd misheard him. The late afternoon sun reflected off the white marble entrance of the Dallas Country Club, where my sister-in-law Lauren's wedding was about to begin. Guests in designer dresses and tailored tuxedos flowed past us laughing as a string quartet played somewhere inside. I wasn't standing in front of the ballroom because I was late. I was standing there because security wouldn't let me enter. My name isn't on the guest list, ma'am. The young security guard had apologized. There must be some mistake. I smiled politely. I'm sure there is. I had expected Ethan to fix everything with one sentence. Instead, he became the mistake. My mother doesn't want you there, he repeated, adjusting the cufflinks I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary. Why? His jaw tightened. She thinks you'll make people uncomfortable. I've barely spoken to anyone in months. That's not the point. Then what is? He sighed as though I were the difficult one. Victoria, you're an embarrassment. The words landed harder than any scream ever could. Not because they were loud, because they were calm, calculated, final. I stared at the man I'd loved since I was 23 years old. The man whose first business proposal I'd rewritten overnight because he was too nervous to present it. The man whose father I'd quietly helped refinance after the family nearly lost everything during the recession. The man whose entire family believed he was their hero. He couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. Behind him I saw my mother-in-law Eleanor greeting guests beneath an enormous arch of white roses. She looked radiant, proud, happy. Why wouldn't she? Just 3 days earlier, I'd bought her dream house, an $8.8 million waterfront mansion in Naples, Florida. She thought Ethan had paid for it. Everyone did. No one knew the money had come from me. I never corrected them. That had always been my mistake. I see, I finally said. Ethan looked relieved. I knew you'd understand. No, I understood something entirely different. I pulled out my phone. He watched me carefully. What are you doing? Replying. I opened our text conversation and typed one word. Understood. I pressed send. Then I looked up and smiled. I hope Lauren has a beautiful wedding. Without waiting for another word, I turned around and walked toward the parking lot. I didn't cry. Not yet. The valet brought my black Mercedes around within minutes. As I settled into the driver's seat, I finally allowed myself one long breath. 22 years. Gone. Not because of another woman. Not because of money. Not because we'd stopped loving each other. Because somewhere along the way, my husband had stopped respecting me. Those are two very different things. Love survives arguments. Respect survives silence. Once respect dies, everything else eventually follows. I started the engine but didn't drive away. Instead, I sat there watching guests arrive. Families posing for photographs. Grandparents hugging grandchildren. Little girls carrying flower baskets. It looked like every perfect American wedding I'd ever attended. Except today. I wasn't family. At least that's what Eleanor wanted everyone to believe. The irony almost made me laugh. Because if anyone there truly knew how much of that wedding had been paid for by me, the entire evening would stop. The flowers, the orchestra, the imported champagne, even Lauren's honeymoon villa in Tuscany. Every invoice had quietly crossed my desk months ago. Eleanor had thanked Ethan repeatedly for his generosity. He accepted every compliment. He never corrected her. At first I thought he was simply avoiding awkward conversations. Over time, avoidance became habit. Habit became expectation. Expectation became entitlement. And entitlement eventually becomes cruelty. My phone buzzed. It was my executive assistant, Megan. Mrs. Bennett. Hi, Megan. You sound different. I probably do. Everything okay? I looked back toward the ballroom. No. She stayed quiet. One reason Megan had worked beside me for 15 years was because she knew when silence mattered more than questions. Finally, she asked softly, "What do you need?" I smiled. Exactly the right question. Not, "What happened?" Not, "Are you okay?" Simply, "What do you need?" I need the number for Daniel. She didn't hesitate. I'll text it now. Within seconds, my phone vibrated again. Daniel Brooks, senior partner. Brooks and Ellison estate attorneys. The man who had spent nearly 2 decades helping structure my businesses, trusts, charitable foundations, and asset protection plans. The man who understood one important fact. Almost everything the Bennett family enjoyed legally depended on me, not Ethan. Not Eleanor. Me. I looked at the number for nearly a minute. Then I locked my phone again. No? Not yet. Anger makes expensive decisions. I had built my career by never acting while emotional. If I was going to change the course of my life, I would do it calmly, methodically, professionally, exactly the way I'd built my fortune. I drove aimlessly through Dallas, past Highland Park, past the office tower where my investment company occupied the top 3 floors, past restaurants where Ethan and I used to celebrate anniversaries. Every street carried memories. Every memory suddenly felt borrowed. At a red light, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. People rarely show you who they are during hard times. They show you during easy ones. Life had become too comfortable for Ethan. He'd forgotten who made that comfort possible. Maybe I'd helped him forget. The light turned green. I kept driving. 48 minutes had passed since I left the country club. Then 53. Then 58. I finally pulled into an empty overlook beside White Rock Lake. The water reflected the orange glow of sunset. Beautiful. Peaceful. Nothing like the storm quietly building inside me. My phone read exactly 1 hour since I had texted Ethan. Understood. I unlocked the screen. Scrolled to Daniel Brooks. Pressed call. He answered before the second ring. Victoria, it's me. I thought you'd be at the wedding. I was. A pause. That doesn't sound good. It isn't. His voice became instantly professional. What would you like me to do? I looked across the lake. For the first time all afternoon, I smiled. Daniel, I think it's time we review every financial arrangement connected to the Bennett family. There was complete silence. Then he quietly replied, I'll meet you at the office within 30 minutes. I ended the call. The sun dipped below the horizon. Some endings arrive with fireworks. Mine arrived with one calm sentence. And one phone call. The Bennett family had no idea that while they were raising champagne glasses inside the ballroom, the foundation beneath everything they believed they owned had just begun to shift. Daniel was already waiting when I arrived. It was nearly 8 o'clock in the evening, yet every light on the 26th floor of my headquarters remained on. My executive team had no idea why I had called an emergency meeting with my attorney after business hours. They only knew that if I requested privacy, I usually had a very good reason. Daniel stood as I entered the conference room. He had been my attorney for almost 19 years. More importantly, he had become one of the few people who knew the complete truth about my marriage. He studied my face for several seconds before speaking. What happened? My husband called me an embarrassment. Daniel slowly removed his glasses. I'm sorry. So am I. Was that all? I laughed softly. No. I placed my phone on the conference table and slid it toward him. He read Ethan's final text. My mother doesn't want you there. You're an embarrassment. Daniel looked back at me. After everything you've done for them? I know. He remained silent. There wasn't much left to say. Sometimes facts speak louder than outrage. 22 years earlier, I had met Ethan Bennett at a commercial real estate conference in Houston. He was charming, confident, funny. He came from what everyone believed was one of Dallas's most respected old money families. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of 2 factory workers who had died within months of each other when I was 16. After bouncing between relatives and foster care, I put myself through college on scholarships, part-time jobs, and sheer stubbornness. By 30, I had built a small but growing investment company specializing in distressed commercial properties. I wasn't glamorous. I simply worked harder than almost everyone else. Ethan admired that, at least, I believed he did. We married 3 years later. During our honeymoon, I learned my first secret about the Bennett family. They weren't wealthy. They only looked wealthy. Their country club memberships, luxury cars, vacation homes, private schools. Everything depended on refinancing old debt with new debt. They had perfected the appearance of success. Behind closed doors, the numbers were terrifying. One evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his head buried in his hands. My father borrowed against everything. How bad is it? Worse than anyone knows. Does your mother know? She refuses to believe it. He looked completely defeated. I don't know how to save them. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out. Back then, I still believed we meant exactly that. Together. Sattainandam Mayo-FND. Within 6 months, I quietly arranged financing through one of my investment partnerships. The Bennett family's manufacturing company survived. No one outside the boardroom ever knew why. Ethan thanked me over dinner. You saved my family. We saved them. He smiled. I couldn't have done it without you. I believed him. At the time, he believed it too. The years passed. My company expanded into Texas, Arizona, Florida, and Colorado. Then California. Then Tennessee. Every acquisition strengthened our portfolio. Every successful deal generated more income than the last. Eventually, money stopped being something I chased. It became something I managed. That was around the time Eleanor's expectations began to change. At first, she only asked for little favors. Victoria, would you mind helping Lauren with her student loans? Of course. Ethan mentioned you understand investments. Could you look over this property? Absolutely. My friend is opening a restaurant. No problem. Every request sounded temporary. Reasonable. Family helping family. Then the requests became larger. Private school tuition. Vacation homes. Medical treatments. Luxury cruises. Investment capital. Designer renovations. Every Christmas brought another expensive surprise someone expected Ethan to provide. Every Christmas. I quietly paid the bill. One afternoon, Eleanor hugged Ethan after he handed her the keys to a new Mercedes. My son always takes care of his mother. I stood 3 feet away. She never looked at me. Ethan smiled awkwardly. He said nothing. Driving home, I asked him gently, "Why didn't you tell her?" He kept his eyes on the road. "It makes her happy." "It isn't true." "I know." "Then why?" He sighed. "You know how Mom is?" I did. She loved appearances, status, recognition, being admired. Correcting her in public would have embarrassed her, so I let it go. Again, and again, and again. Looking back, every silence taught her another dangerous lesson. She learned she could erase me, and I'd allow it. Daniel opened one of the folders he'd brought. "You've personally funded 38 major purchases for the Bennett family." I stopped counting. I didn't. He slid several pages toward me. There they were. Property acquisitions, trust contributions, private loans, business guarantees, medical expenses, tuition payments, charitable donations made in Eleanor's name. Nearly every milestone the Bennett family celebrated over the past 2 decades had one thing in common. My signature. Not Ethan's. Mine. Daniel looked at me carefully. "Do you remember what I asked you when we structured these agreements?" I nodded. "You asked if I was protecting myself. And what did you say?" "I said I trusted my husband. And I told you trust and documentation should never replace each other." He wasn't criticizing me. He was reminding me. Everything had been documented. Every transfer. Every guarantee. Every legal obligation. The Bennett family simply never bothered reading the paperwork. They assumed Ethan handled everything. Ironically, Ethan assumed I always would. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas. The city lights shimmered beneath the summer sky. Beautiful. Busy. Unaware that my entire life had changed in a single afternoon. "I keep asking myself one question," I admitted. Daniel waited. "When did he stop seeing me?" He thought for a long moment. "I don't think he stopped seeing you." I turned toward him. "I think he stopped noticing the cost of everything you quietly carried." That sentence stayed with me. People often appreciate miracles, until miracles become routine. Then they call them expectations. My phone vibrated. Ethan. Incoming call. I stared at the screen. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, another call. Then another. Then Lauren. Then Eleanor. I didn't answer any of them. Finally, a text arrived from Ethan. "Where are you?" "Mom says the Naples closing has been delayed. The title company won't release the property. They say there's a problem with the funding. Can you call me?" I read it twice. Interesting. The legal review hadn't even begun. Daniel noticed my expression. "What is it?" I handed him my phone. He smiled for the first time that evening. "They're already feeling the first ripple." I looked down at the growing list of missed calls. For 22 years. Whenever the Bennett family needed something, they called me. Not because they loved me, because I solved problems. Tonight would be different. Tonight, for the very first time, their problems would have to wait. I slept for exactly 3 hours. Not because I was anxious, because my mind had already made its decision. When you've spent your entire adult life making multi-million-dollar business decisions, you learn something important. Emotion belongs at home. Facts belong at the conference table. At 6:30 the next morning, I walked into my office carrying a cup of black coffee. Dallas was just waking up. My executive assistant Megan looked up from her desk. "You've got a full schedule today." "I know." She hesitated. "And your husband has called 17 times. I figured. He also came by around 6 this morning. I stopped walking. "He came here. He wanted to see you. What did you tell him?" "Exactly what you once told me to say." She smiled politely. "Mrs. Bennett isn't available without an appointment." I couldn't help smiling. "Thank you. I assumed you had your reasons." "I do?" At 8 o'clock sharp, Daniel entered the boardroom carrying 4 thick binders. Behind him came 2 senior attorneys. Then my chief financial officer, Robert. Finally, my trust administrator, Melissa. Every person sitting around that table had signed confidentiality agreements years ago. They knew the truth about my financial structure. None of them had ever met Ethan socially. That had been intentional. I wanted my business and my marriage to remain separate. Ironically, that separation was about to save me. Daniel opened the meeting. Victoria has requested a complete legal review of every active financial arrangement benefiting the Bennett family. No one looked surprised. Professional people don't react with emotion. They react with questions. Robert adjusted his glasses. Are we discussing suspension or termination? Review first, I answered. Then action where appropriate. Melissa opened a spreadsheet. There are 37 active obligations. Walk me through them. She nodded. The Naples property scheduled to close tomorrow. $8.8 million. Correct. The funding currently sits inside a revocable family trust awaiting final authorization. Daniel looked toward me. That authorization requires your signature. I haven't signed.
No,
Robert continued. There are also 4 personal guarantees attached to Ethan's investment company. Any legal obligation requiring me to continue? He scanned several pages. No. What happens if they're withdrawn? The banks will request replacement collateral within 30 days. And if none exists, the loans become immediately callable. I leaned back quietly. Interesting. I hadn't realized Ethan had become that financially exposed. Not because I'd never cared. Because I'd never imagined I'd need to know. Daniel folded his hands. Victoria. Yes, I need to ask something directly. I nodded. Are you trying to punish your husband? The room became silent. Everyone waited. I thought carefully before answering. No. Then what are you trying to accomplish? The truth. No one spoke. Finally, I continued. For 22 years, I've allowed everyone, including Ethan, to believe a version of reality that simply isn't true. Robert nodded slowly. I understand. I won't destroy anyone. I know. But I also won't continue financing people who publicly humiliate me. Daniel smiled slightly. That's a very different objective. It is. At exactly 9:42 a.m., Daniel drafted the first letter. It wasn't dramatic. No lawsuits. No threats. Simply a formal notice. Pending review, funding for the Naples property is temporarily suspended until further written authorization by the grantor. The grantor. Me. A second letter followed. The title company. A third. The escrow officer. A fourth. The estate planning bank. Everything happened according to contracts everyone had signed years earlier. Nothing illegal. Nothing emotional. Just paperwork. Funny how paperwork changes lives. Meanwhile, about 40 miles away, the Bennett family had gathered for a farewell brunch following Lauren's wedding. I didn't need to imagine it. Later I would hear every detail. Lauren was opening gifts when Eleanor's phone rang. She answered cheerfully. Then her smile disappeared. What do you mean the closing has been suspended? Across the room, Ethan reportedly looked up. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Another 30 seconds passed. Then Eleanor's voice became louder. No, that's impossible. Guests turned to stare. The money is already there. Silence. Then, what authorization? She ended the call abruptly. Ethan. What? They're refusing to release the house. He frowned. What are you talking about? They say the funding hasn't been approved. He reportedly laughed. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. My wife handled everything. Exactly. I had. At 10:15, my phone rang again. Ethan. This time? I answered. Hello. His relief was immediate. Victoria, finally. Good morning. Something crazy is happening. So I've heard. The Naples closing has stopped. I know. They're saying they need your authorization. That's correct. Long silence. What do you mean? I mean exactly what they told you. I don't understand. I don't think you ever tried to. His breathing changed. Victoria, are you angry about yesterday? I looked out the window. What do you think? I'm sorry if I didn't mean. You told me I was an embarrassment. I was upset. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice softened. My mother was emotional. So you agreed with her? I was trying to keep the peace. I almost laughed. Whose peace? Another silence. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Can you just call them and fix this? There it was. Not. How are you? Not. Are you okay? Not. Can we talk? Simply. Fix it. I closed my eyes. Ethan. Yeah. Do you know whose money bought that house? Mine. No. Silence. My company transferred the funds. He didn't respond. I personally established the trust. Nothing. I personally guaranteed the purchase. Still nothing. Finally. You're joking. I've never joked about business. He sounded genuinely confused. But everyone said, I know. You never corrected us. No. Why? Because I believed protecting my husband's pride mattered. His breathing became heavier. You mean, everything Eleanor thanked you for. I stopped. He finished the sentence himself. Was you. Yes, neither of us spoke for almost a minute. 22 years of assumptions were collapsing inside his mind. Finally he whispered, I didn't know. I believe you. Victoria. But not knowing stopped being an excuse yesterday. Around noon, Megan knocked gently. There's someone downstairs. Ethan. She nodded. He refuses to leave. I looked at Daniel. What do you recommend? He smiled. As your attorney, yes. Don't avoid him forever. And as my friend, make him wait. I smiled. For how long? He glanced at his watch. Long enough to understand what you've been waiting 22 years to receive? What? Respect. I stood and walked toward the elevator. Not to meet Ethan. Not yet. First, there was one more document waiting for my signature. The final suspension of every discretionary financial benefit connected to the Bennett family. I picked up the pen, signed my name, placed it back on the table. Outside my office window, the Dallas skyline looked exactly the same. Inside, everything had changed. By the time I finally agreed to see Ethan, he had been sitting in the reception area of my office for nearly 3 hours. Megan walked into my office and asked quietly, Are you ready? I looked at the clock. It was almost 4 in the afternoon. Yes. She nodded and returned a few minutes later. Ethan's here. I took a slow breath before stepping into the private conference room. He was standing beside the window with both hands in his pockets. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose. His eyes were bloodshot. For the first time in years, he didn't look like the confident Bennett everyone admired. He looked like a man who had just discovered his life wasn't what he thought it was. When he turned toward me, I barely recognized him. You look tired, I said. I didn't sleep. I did. He gave a weak smile. I guess one of us had to. Neither of us sat immediately. Finally, he spoke. I need you to explain what's happening. I already did. No, he shook his head. I mean everything. I studied him for several seconds. Then I pulled out the chair across from him. Sit. Daniel entered carrying 3 thick binders. Ethan frowned. What are those? My records. Daniel placed them neatly on the table. Mrs. Bennett asked me to prepare a complete financial history involving your family. Ethan looked confused. Why? Because yesterday you told her she wasn't family. The room became silent. Daniel opened the first binder. Let's start with 2008. He slid a document across the table. Your father's manufacturing company. Ethan glanced at it casually. Then his expression changed. This loan was funded through Victoria's investment partnership. I thought First National Bank. They only serviced the loan. Daniel pointed to another page. The capital came from her. Ethan slowly looked at me. You never told me. You never asked. The second binder opened.